Welcome to this explainer. You know, if you're a fan of psychological thrillers, you've definitely noticed a pattern. The killers on screen, they're almost always portrayed as these quiet loners, social outcasts who sit in the shadows, just meticulously developing this deep-seated hatred for the world. Makes for a fantastic movie, right? But what happens when that creeping dread isn't just a script? Today, we are diving into a real, deeply unsettling story. We're looking at a man from China who became one of the absolute deadliest, most elusive serial killers in the country's history. A literal phantom who brought an entire region to its knees.
Okay, let's dive into this chilling quote. Society destroyed my life. This is the terrifying foundation of everything we're about to uncover. It's the rationale of a man who confessed to murdering dozens of people in just a few short years. And here's the thing, he didn't do it for money. This wasn't some gang war or organized crime syndicate. No, he murdered out of a pure, calculated, and honestly terrifying belief that society had ruined his life. And so society was going to pay. It's this incredibly chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous weapon a person can possibly wield is a grievance they've just nurtured in the dark.
To really grasp the scale of this, you have to put yourself in that atmosphere. By the early 2000s, this absolute paralyzing fear had gripped several rural areas across China. Families were just utterly terrified. Picture entire communities where the sun going down meant an immediate lockdown. People were bolting their doors and shutting their windows way earlier at night. The panic was so intense that some villages literally organized their own amateur nighttime patrols, because rumors were spreading like wildfire from town to town about this phantom serial killer, someone who struck without warning and just vanished without a trace.
So who exactly was this phantom killer? That was the central question paralyzing the region and, frankly, completely baffling the authorities. The police were totally in the dark here. They were hunting an attacker who seemed to be an actual ghost. I mean, he was leaving absolutely no recognizable patterns for investigators to follow. No signature weapon, no specific victim profile, no predictable geography whatsoever. Just this horrific trail of devastation and a continuously growing list of terrified communities.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 1, A World in Notebooks. We'll look at Yang Xinhai's origins.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the profound duality of his existence. To understand how a phantom is created, we actually have to jump all the way back to 1968. That's when Yang Xinhai was born in rural China, growing up in extreme poverty with several siblings. On the outside, you have this mask, right? He was quiet, academically gifted, completely forgettable. While other kids were outside playing, he was just in his room alone. But hidden away in his notebooks, he was constructing these incredibly dark, fictional universes. He'd write these elaborate stories where the main character, who was almost always based on himself, by the way, was a lonely outsider committing violent crimes and escaping every single time. At first, his parents just thought it was creative writing, but the level of detail, the precise locations, the timings, the methods, it deeply disturbed them. This wasn't just imagination, it was obsessive planning.
And that isolation eventually pushed him out of the normal world entirely. At just 17 years old, Yang dropped out of school, basically claiming he just couldn't tolerate being around other people anymore. After a massive argument with his family, he left home for good, kicking off this very calculating, transient lifestyle. He traveled all over different parts of China, picking up temporary jobs just to get by. But here's where it gets dark. That survival mode soon evolved into predation. He started engaging in petty thefts, stealing wallets, robbing strangers, breaking into homes. But he was so patient. He studied people. He'd watch their routines, wait for the absolute perfect opportunity, and really learned exactly how to avoid drawing attention to himself.
Moving right along to Section 2, the societal break. Let's look at his fractured mind.
So this timeline right here marks the actual breaking point. This is the moment where a petty, transient thief fundamentally fractured and escalated into a profound, lethal danger. In the late 1980s, his petty crimes finally catch up with him, and he gets sent to a labor camp. He gets out, commits more crimes, goes right back to prison. But when he finally gets out years later, investigators note a really distinct shift in his psychology. It's not just about theft anymore. Post-release, he becomes completely obsessed with a woman he barely even knows, stalking her for days before attacking her. Luckily, she escapes and he goes back to prison. But the real catalyst, that happens in the late 1990s. He's released again and actually manages to start a serious relationship. For a split second, it looks like stabilization might be possible. But then, the woman discovers his extensive criminal history and leaves him immediately.
The absolutely crucial point here is how he internalized that breakup. According to investigators, that romantic rejection completely, irreversibly broke his psyche. Instead of taking an ounce of accountability for his own actions, instead of realizing, hey, my own massive criminal record drove her away, he just blamed society. He genuinely convinced himself that the world had systematically ruined his life. He literally weaponized his rejection, taking all of his own personal failures and directing this blinding, terrifying rage outward at the entire world.
Which brings us to Section 3, hiding in plain sight, and his unpredictable methods.
And this brilliantly illustrates why he was so hard to catch. Between the late 90s and early 2000s, Yang's violence escalated dramatically across multiple provinces. So how on earth did he operate completely undetected for so long? Well, look at his methods. Hammers, axes, shovels. These were tools he simply found lying around at the crime scenes. He intentionally created chaos to prevent any patterns from forming. Remember those dark notebooks from his youth? That meticulous planning? He was applying that exact same dark intelligence to his real-world crimes. He knew for a fact that if he used the same weapon twice, the police would instantly identify a pattern. So he changed them up constantly. In several cases, he even committed arson, just setting homes on fire after the attacks, to completely destroy any lingering forensic evidence.
But the weapons? That's really only half the story. The other half was his ultimate camouflage, his utter, total ordinariness. I mean, he was a master at being absolutely nobody. He'd blend into crowds with this terrifying ease. He'd move from town to town, pick up some temporary manual labor job, blend right in with the local workforce, commit an atrocity, and then completely vanish before anyone even thought to be suspicious of the quiet new guy. It's a genuinely horrifying reality to process, because the man responsible for this unimaginable terror, he looked exactly like someone you've probably walked past on the street today.
And that leads us to Section 4, a panicked mistake. How the ghost was finally caught.
For years, he was literally the ghost in the machine, uncatchable, completely invisible. But every phantom eventually makes contact with reality, right? And when Yang finally slipped up, it wasn't during some masterfully planned, dramatic standoff. No, in 2003, his reign of terror came to a very abrupt, anticlimactic halt during a routine nightclub inspection. Yang was just sitting inside. Suddenly, local police officers walk in, and they weren't even there for him. They were literally just conducting a standard inspection of the venue. But Yang didn't know that. The second he saw those uniforms, his quiet facade completely cracked. He panicked. Witnesses said he immediately looked intensely nervous and made this highly suspicious attempt to just quietly slip out through the back exit. That single, tiny moment of erratic behavior is what finally caught the police's attention, and they stopped him for questioning.
Once they ran his records and brought him in, they quickly realized they had someone connected to multiple violent crimes. And then, the dam just broke. Yang confessed. And we're not talking about one murder, not 10, but dozens. Dozens of victims. Men, women, children, entire families. Even the most seasoned investigators were absolutely sickened and shocked by the sheer volume of cases he was admitting to. And the craziest part? He didn't boast. He didn't yell. According to reports, he just calmly and methodically described the locations, the changing methods, and these microscopic details from crimes across multiple provinces. The scale of the violence he so casually unveiled literally stunned the entire country.
When they asked him why he did it, he gave that exact same chilling answer. Society had treated him unfairly, and his anger just kept growing. The final consequence of his actions came very swiftly. In 2004, Yang Xinhai was sentenced to death. And later that exact same year, he was executed. The brutal, devastating timeline of his revenge on society was finally brought to an end, closing the book on one of the darkest chapters in modern criminal history.
But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought that really lingers long after the facts are laid out. Obviously, struggling in life or feeling rejected does not ever justify violence. Millions of people face terrible hardship without ever hurting a single soul. But what makes this specific case so deeply, deeply disturbing is just how long Yang managed to be completely invisible. A quiet man, a loner, someone holding years and years of violent obsession behind a totally ordinary face. It kind of forces us to ask, as we walk through our busy lives, just passing strangers on the street, how many others are hiding in plain sight? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.